Hola, hola. Where are we? Welcome for another day of Humpday Q&A. Back to our usual antics, right?
I didn't. Anyway, no, you were driving that time.
Yeah, we weren't here last week. We were trying to deal with various things happening, and I myself got a case of COVID, so lucky me. But I'm back, fully functional, aiming to just go fully at this as best we can. Right. So a little bit about me and Scott, and then we'll get into the actual thing that everyone's here for. So yes, my name's Simon Lightfoot. I'm a community leader and do not work for Google. I work for Dev Angels in London. And there's my Twitter handle. Scott, more about you.
I am Scott Stahl, community leader, organizer, GVDG Cleveland. And I also do not work for Google. We're trying to be very clear about that with folks. You know, Google's legal gets cranky.
And we'll briefly go over the do's and don'ts. Scott.
Be nice, be decent. I don't care if it's YouTube. Be nice and decent anyway. Don't post anything that's adult, rude, offensive. Don't advertise and promote your service. The big one we do keep seeing is people spamming their questions specifically. If you can still see your question on the chat screen, don't post it again. It's a quick way to get your question put at the bottom of the pile, and we may or may not get to it. And of course, harassment of any kind, incels, bigotry, etc., etc. And as we've said a bunch of times, we share ban lists with the other resources in the community, things such as Slack and others. So if you get ejected from here, don't be surprised if your access to a number of other places has suddenly been shut off.
But on a happy note, we're here to have a good time. And we have a Randall in the background who's going to be, so you don't have to double post because Randall's in the background and he's going to be quickly getting in there and getting your questions all hooked up for us so we can.
He's putting your questions in a list, and if he sees the same question 3 times, he's taking your question out of the list.
And what we want, is those cues in front of those questions so Randall can find them and we can help you with all your problems. So today we have a couple of special guests and we'll bring them on stream now. So we have a Chris and Gary. Welcome to the stream.
Hey, Simon.
Hey, thanks.
So I think last time, Chris, we met in person. It was a while ago, actually, when we met in person, wasn't it? It was JoyCon October or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's on the boundary between October and November, wasn't it? Right at the end of October.
Yeah, it was a while ago. So please introduce yourselves.
So I'm Chris. I'm an engineer at the app company.
And I'm Gary, and I'm also an engineer at the app company since November.
So just want to briefly mention what the app company is about. So from my understanding, I'm speaking for you here, but from my understanding, what I'd say it is a platform for privacy would be my simplest notion of what the most direct way of explaining it is. It's a way of developers ensuring that their customers' data and everything's kept private and secure and what everyone wants, really.
So the way I normally describe it, Simon, is we give a place for everybody and everything to put their data and control who has access to it. But that also means that we're a very useful mobile backend as a service. And from an app dev perspective, that backend as a service, because it's scaled across lots of individual places to store things, means that you can write applications without really thinking too hard about databases and that sort of thing at the back end. You can just kind of treat all of the data as being local and then sync it out.
And people and the developers listening to us right now can find more at sign.dev.
From the development standpoint, yes, and then that's from the user standpoint. So,
yeah. So I hear you have a presentation for us. We will be taking questions about @Sign and everything they're doing. I want to hear more about what you guys have been up to in this embedded space I keep hearing twinkles of. So the stage will be yours, and feel free to share your content, and then we'll get you going. And then just to word to everyone, please enter your questions in the chat. As Q, as we mentioned, and then after the presentation, we'll be going through your questions for Gary and Chris here first of all around the topic of @sign, and then we'll go to general Q&A for however long we can keep that going for. So it's not coming through yet, Chris.
Okay, yeah, just sharing my screen now.
That's right.
So that should be ready.
Perfect. Yeah. The stage is all yours, and we'll leave you to it.
Thanks very much, Simon. So I'm going to just play a quick video. So this is a demo that we're taking to Mobile World Congress next week. It's based upon a Raspberry Pi, and we've got a 4G LTE card in there, and then also a hat with a TFT display so we can see what's going on locally. But the business end of this is a biometric sensor, so that can read heart rate and oxygen saturation. A lot of people have been using these to see how badly they're suffering from COVID. So you can see there the heart rates being picked up and showing locally on the screen. And we're also reading in the oxygen saturation. So those data are being sent up to an @sign. And from that @sign, we can then control who has access to that data. So this is a Windows desktop application that we put together with Flutter. And here we're showing the data going to a doctor. And so the doctor's getting both the heart rate and the O2 saturation being presented to them. But the customer is completely in control of the data and where it's going to. So say if they were wanting to share data with their fitness instructor, they might only want to send through the heart rate and not the oxygen saturation. And so this is showing how the same application being used by a different receiving @sign is only getting there a part of the data which has been under the user control. And we're just in the process of building a management application for the demo, which is going to take care of that. Another part of it is things like biographical data. And so, for example, if the person doing this is kind of using some fitness equipment and monitoring their heart rate and O2 saturation while they're doing that, that fitness equipment might need some engineering support. And in this case, they're sharing their location with the engineer so that they can come to the right place and provide that service. And the @signs allow people to then remove that information after the visit so that they're not oversharing stuff. So if I switch now over to a slide which kind of illustrates the end-to-end of what's going on here. And end-to-end is the key. So if you think about most IoT at the moment, people are getting devices, and those devices are connecting to an associated service provider, and they're sending data into that service provider, and the service provider is collecting all of that data and then providing apps that sit on top of that collection of data. And so the example that has been recently used is Peloton. And President Biden was told by the Secret Service not to use his Peloton bike because they were worried about people hacking into Peloton and getting the president's biometric data out of his Peloton application. With this, what we're doing is the data is end-to-end encrypted. And so on the device, we've got keys, and we're storing those keys in a SIM card because the device doesn't have the secure element like we would normally have reachable from Flutter apps on an Android handset or an iOS phone or a tablet. So that's what we've been working with Zariat, who are a SIM provider for. And actually next week at Mobile World Congress, it's Zariat that we're showing up with. But then that data's encrypted at that end. It's sent up to the @sign. The @sign gives control over then which other at-signs the data is shared with. And then when the data gets to those other at-signs, it's going into applications, which can be mobile apps, tablet apps, desktop apps. And the keys for those at-signs are what unlocks that data. And so it's end-to-end encrypted all the way from the device that's creating the data to the application that's making use of that data. And so any service provider around that, they're not seeing the data. They've got no control over the data. So we're kind of taking away that service provider potential compromise from the picture there. And I think that's an illustration of how people can kind of win their privacy back with the Internet of Things. Now, obviously, certain service providers are kind of building their business model out of exploiting that data and maybe selling advertising on the top of it or other means. So that can't go on anymore. But I think it allows device suppliers to build privacy preserving services around them. And I think there is an appetite out there because as we get more IoT devices in our lives, we don't really want them to be spying on us. So I'll stop the screen share there and come back to it if we need to when there's questions. But maybe pass the baton to Gary because he's been having some fun in the last few days doing kind of low-level Dart device driver work for the sensor.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So Dart is a new language to me. I started with it back in November when I joined the app company. I really like the language, and I really like Flutter as a framework to go with it. And actually, so when it came to putting together this demo, Chris scoured the internet, found some libraries in Python, and the one we settled, we had fun with devices as well, with incompatibilities between libraries that were out there and the devices that we had purchased. But all of that apart, we couldn't find any really complete library out there that would do both heart rate and O2 measurements. So there are Arduino libraries and other pieces of code out there that do that, but with an older version of the device. So for the past few days, I've been porting C++ to Dart to do a faithful port of one of those libraries. Unfortunately, that was with the wrong device, so I've got all the wrong registers and the things to talk to the device. So when we tested this morning, the sensor didn't catch fire, but it didn't work either. But that's good. My expectation yesterday was maybe halt and catch fire, but it didn't catch fire. So now I'm porting Python bits and pieces, or finding, more correctly, I'm finding the looking at the device sheet, the sheet that goes with the device about what its registers are and what their functions are, as well as some Python code, and trying to munge that all together into the device driver. The great thing is that all of the bits and pieces that we needed are there in Dart as well. So one of the packages, or the package that I'm using, is Dart Periphery, which is really nicely put together set of packages around basically low-level device driver type stuff, so serial bus stuff, and I2C, which is what I'm using here. So great fun, and we had a great moment this morning when we connected to the device. So that was good, but of course nothing's happening.
And actually, while we've been doing all of this, a for real medical devices company has been exploring using the app platform as a way of getting patient data into hospital environments, and that's normally really tricky and involves far too many VPNs and all of the vagaries of establishing and re-establishing virtual private networks. And they've been taking the sample code that we've been working on for this and let us know just this afternoon that they've now got data going end to end from a real medical quality heart rate and O2 sensor into their hospital backend, making use of @signs in the middle. And the primary advantage for them is just getting through firewalls without having to use VPNs. But I think that they'll also discover some further advantages from the app platform in terms of the ability to have user control over the data that's being shared and who to.
And just add one more thing to that. In my past, I've worked on an app which was about a research study, partnering with some folks at Cambridge University, and that was a pain research study. And so managing that data and making sure that data was secured and making sure that only clinicians had access to the appropriate set of data and other people didn't have access to that data. There's a lot of stuff that goes into managing all of this. And of course, even then you're subject to the bugs that always creep in. Somebody releases something that breaks some access control somewhere, and suddenly you've got a personal privacy / GDPR nightmare on your hands. And a great thing about this technology is I could rebuild that same app now, and I would have none of that to worry about. It's incredibly compelling, I think, especially for the medical and research space, but obviously for many others as well.
I think the receiver app has been a great example of Flutter supporting multi-platform development. So our CTO Colin had previously developed a Flutter app which was using some meters for radio station in order to show broadcast strength and those sorts of things. And so he was able to kind of refactor that into the app that you saw in the video of the 2 dials for heart rate and O2 saturation. But then from that single Flutter code base, we've been able to generate applications for Android, iOS, Windows Desktop, etc. And we've got all of those in the respective stores. Well, Windows stores still outstanding, ready for MWC next week. So that's been a really quick process for us to have apps across all of the platforms. So Simon, I think that's kind of it in terms of the introduction. Hopefully we've got some questions.
Yeah, let's see what we've got going on. Let's see now. Yeah, anyone just a little cursor reminder. Yeah, please enter your questions in the chat. Queue in front of them. We'll pick them up. Let's see what we got going on. I'm gonna look through and see if we can find some pertinent security or @sign related questions to show first of all. Let's see. Is end-to-end encryption, is it symmetric or asymmetric? If symmetric, how the keys shared?
Okay, so the end-to-end encryption is mostly symmetric. So we're using AES to encrypt things before they go on the wire. But the keys that are used to do that are asymmetric keys, so public keys and private keys. So we use at the moment RSA 248 as the underlying key mechanism for that. And so with an @sign, what we do to bootstrap an @sign is we have a CRAM key, which is a shared secret between the initializing application and the @sign itself. And then during that initialization process, that's when the RSA 248 key pair is generated. And what we're doing at the IoT device end with that is placing the PCAM private key into the SIM card. So that's where Zariat have been helping us out by configuring the SIM cards in such a way that we can place the PCAM keys onto them. What we normally have done with those keys with @signs where they're connecting to regular apps on phones and tablets and stuff, is put them into the secure element on those devices. And with desktop, we've been using the Flutter biometric storage package in order to make best use of the available security mechanisms on desktop. So that's really good on Mac because that's putting it into the similar secure element that's present on the Mac to what you see with iPhone and iPad. Mileage varies a bit more when you get into Windows and Linux. So with Windows 11, there's now a mandated TPM level 2 for key storage. And so we'll be able to take advantage of that. With Windows 10, although a lot of the hardware's got that stuff, it's mostly disabled in the BIOS. And so not presented through to the operating system and thus not available to the biometric storage package. We're actually going back to the package that we used prior to biometric storage because we found some regular wrinkles with biometric storage against new Kotlin versions coming along, and a kind of forced march on having to upgrade the entire tool chain to make that work. So we've gone back to the package that we were using before to drive the secure elements, because that previously only supported the mobile secure elements, but now it's supporting both. The next step for us with the keys will be, instead of generating the keys in software and placing them into a secure storage area like the mobile secure element or a SIM card, we'd like to be able to generate the keys inside of the secure element, and then just make use of the key within that secure element for the things that a private key is required for. And they're all set up to do that, but you need to interface with the low-level APIs, and that's where it can get tricky. From a point of practicality at the moment, when we generate keys on a mobile device, we encourage people to export them, because otherwise, if they lose their device, they're going to lose the key to all of the data that they've put into their @sign. And also, if you're using multiple @signs across a device or multiple devices even, then you would want to use the same key so you can get into that @sign. So hopefully that explains what's going on with keys, but it really is at the heart of what we're doing here, because end-to-end encryption is all about ensuring that we're making use of keys under the control of the user at each end. And then I suppose another noteworthy implementation detail is when we're interacting with @signs, the @sign will tell you about the public key of the user of that @sign. That's actually publicly available data from the @sign. And so to get that end-to-end flow, what we're effectively doing is fetching the public key of the @sign that we're sending stuff to, and then we can create an encrypted message to that @sign.
Right. That only they can decrypt because they would have their private key and so on.
Yeah.
And I guess in case, I mean, it's implicit in what we've been saying, but just to make it very explicit, the infrastructure that the app company runs, we never see those private keys ever. They only ever stay on the client device. And as Chris was saying, we'd like it so that the software doesn't even see that key, but it's generated in a secure element. But it's really important that those keys are kept as far away from abuse potential as possible.
And the last time we were playing with Raspberry Pis was for the self-hosting alternative. So, we run the app platform, which is where we're hosting @signs, but people have the option to self-host an @sign. So they can take an @sign and run it on a Raspberry Pi or an AWS or GCP or Azure VM or a VPS or
a computer,
the computer under their desk, whatever they want. Essentially anything that can run Docker can run our distributed edge secondary server, and that means @signs that are not under our direct control. So in that case, we wouldn't even have any ability to see the traffic flows in and out of those @signs.
True end to end.
Yep.
I have another question here from Marty. I'm probably saying his name wrong. Would it make sense to use this for building apps around the FHIR healthcare APIs?
So absolutely yes. And we actually had a hackathon towards the end of last year, which we called Fire at Hack, because we were working with a whole bunch of experts in the medical field to develop applications around FHIR. And so there's already some good Dart packages for that, which means building Flutter apps that are kind of capturing and managing FHIR data is pretty straightforward. But because there's so much interest in privacy and ensuring that the data that we're managing is in compliance with all of the respective rules around patient data, there's been a lot of interest from that community in what we're doing with end-to-end encryption and privacy preserving application platforms. So yeah, it's a great application area for us.
Right, let's see if we have anything else coming in.
While you're okay, go ahead.
Is your microphone's really hot? Is your no, it's really loud. Yeah. Is your code available somewhere? I'm interested in the security aspects of it.
So yes, the all of the code for the app platform is open source, and so the key parts of this are kind of @server, which is the stuff that we run in the cloud and that people can also self-host, and the @client SDK, which is the main chunk of the SDK. Though we've also got a whole bunch of Flutter widgets, etc., which build upon that. So that's all available in GitHub @sign-foundation, which is the organization that we use for our open source. The code specifically for this demo is presently in a private repo on our company organization. But I think that's just been a kind of while we've been working on it thing. So there's nothing really proprietary about that. So I expect we'll be separately open sourcing that device driver that Gary was talking about as a package that will get published into PubDev. And then I think we'll also open source the MWC demo because we've already found that it's an application that's helping people get going with the IoT use cases. What we've been doing here is we've got a sender app, which is basically taking data from the sensor and sending that to an @sign, and then the receiver app, which is the Flutter application where you were seeing the dials. That's the sender end of it. We're sort of interfacing locally with things like MQTT, which is a telemetry protocol, which is very frequently used with IoT devices. And that's primarily because we just can't drive the LCD screen on the Raspberry Pi directly from Dart at the moment. So that device has a frame buffer interface. And we didn't find a frame buffer package, and it wasn't something that we were willing to kind of bite off and dive into. So we're driving that from Pygame at the moment, and then using MQTT to get the data into the Python parts of it.
I think you'd be surprised actually. Like, sorry, just thinking technically about the driving the screen there. If there's a C library, you can easily create an FFI wrapper for Dart, assuming that it exists.
We probably could have taken that approach, and this is something that has been
it's extra stuff that are out of the realm of the direct,
yeah.
part. So yeah, totally understand.
This has all been lashed together in the last few weeks at great speed. So I think some people have been very surprised that we've actually had a working demo in time for the press conference we did yesterday.
Wait, throwing something together at the last second before a conference? No one does that. There's a joke, folks, among people who give talks. You're not a real speaker until you are desperately trying to finish your slides in the Uber on the way to the event.
Yep.
I kind of find another thing, just taking a step back there to Dart. You said you used that Dart periphery library that I brought up on stream earlier. Yeah. So that actually uses, I had a quick look, that actually uses a C library under the hood using FFI. Yep. There is actually ways, depending on what you're connecting to, if it's SPI or whatever the bus is, you can actually open up the file handles directly from Dart and actually access them directly. So that might also be slightly less cumbersome in terms of distribution or supported platform. So whatever Dart compiles to will also support. And there's no shipping, because my concern. Sorry, just vocalizing this out loud. So when I looked at that, there's these shared object files, right, which are just they're sort of opaque pieces of data. Well, what's going on in there? So it's like to see see it going on in Dart makes things a lot simpler and feels a lot more secure as well. In that respect.
Yeah, I totally agree, Simon. And in the process of lashing together,
I totally get it's lashing together. So I'm just it's a really interesting point. Right?
I would, Chris and I would both love everything to be pure Dart, and I think, I think we might end up actually going there because, as Chris said, this is proving useful in many contexts outside of just a demo for a conference. So maybe they will continue to polish this up. Get Dart driving the screen and get Dart talking directly to the bus, because I think it's a nice thing to go. And you're absolutely right. Seeing that control all the way down is pretty important.
For anyone that doesn't know, Sony have been working on embedded Linux. So they've actually been working on embedded Linux that work directly with the frame buffer as well. So that's quite handy as well. So if you're trying to get Flutter working on a device that's a support GPU that's on their there's a listing on their site, then there's a possibility that could also work. And I know that teams from the Shinmei from the Flutter engine team did a early Raspberry Pi, I think it was Raspberry Pi 3, but I don't think it's supported anymore by Flutter. I think the ARM without hardware FP is not supported anymore. You have to have a hardware floating point processor. But he's also done some drivers as well. So there's interesting stuff going on in embedded.
Clear that one up, because I've spent a lot of time on this.
Oh yeah, please.
As we were developing the Docker support for ARM v7, which we needed to do the distributed edge secondary server. So the earliest Raspberry Pi, the Raspberry Pi 1, the system on chip in that is basically ARM v6 hardware floating point, but it's not an ARM v7. And Dart used to support ARM v6 and doesn't anymore. So later Raspberry Pis have mostly used ARM v7 system on chips. And then as we get to the even more recent ones, they're using ARM v8. And the issue there has been Raspberry Pi operating system, Raspbian as it was previously known, has been 32-bit. And so that makes the ARM v8 system on chips look like they're ARM v7s. And lots of weird stuff starts breaking because the world is increasingly becoming sort of 64-bit native. And you know, a lot of the libraries out there, when you're doing 32-bit stuff in them, they're starting to kind of disconnect from a 64-bit world. So you know, as recently as, well, actually the most recent Dart release, 2.16.1, was breaking stuff for us in ARM v7 on Docker. And it's one of these 32-bit, 64-bit wrinkles. And you have to use some backported libraries in order to work around that. So it kind of looked like that point release of Dart had introduced some sort of problem, but it's not really the Dart team's fault. It's the fact that people are still stuck on 32-bit operating systems on 64-bit hardware. Now, in the last few weeks, 64-bit Raspberry Pi OS has come out of beta and is now full-on release. So I'm really crossing my fingers that my days of dealing with ARM v7 are coming to an end. And so the early Raspberry Pis and the Raspberry Pi, the original Raspberry Pi Zero, are kind of, they're not supported at all. But anything more recent is kind of supported now as ARM v7, but will probably run better and more reliably as ARM v8 when using a 64-bit operating system. So yeah, I'm kind of waiting for the day to come where everybody's sort of using 64-bit Raspberry Pi OS by default. But that, as we've been on this journey, that kind of throws up as well. There's an awful lot of stuff where the ecosystem is struggling to support the rate of change. So things like the TFT display, there's been a shift from a Debian Bullseye to Debian Bullseye from the previous Debian release, and the drivers just haven't caught up yet. And so we've actually had to use an older version of Raspberry Pi OS just to support the TFT properly. And so yeah,
I mean, to be honest, like, this is nothing new to me. I mean, these are the types of problems you get when you're dealing with embedded, right? Like, you're dealing with closer to the metal, you're going to be dealing with these sorts of problems. I think it's kind of interesting that we're dealing with the high level language and the features that you get from that with a lower level hardware. It really is an interesting dynamic, and it's something new because, yeah, again, trying to take a step back from doing memory management and handling stuff in C on the embedded devices is always a pleasant thing. I think that's why Python, MicroPython and things like that have been very popular on embedded platforms. I think Dart could make that way there as well.
Yeah, we're finding it really tractable, and I think it's been nice, hasn't it, Gary?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
There's I suppose there's also a performance aspect. I mean, have you guys been seeing any problems with performance with what you've been doing on? I mean, you obviously haven't been doing it that much with it, but
so the usual thing about VM startup time, and so that's driving us once again to be doing AOT binaries. So what I'd like to do here is when I'm starting stuff up, I just want it to be instant rather than, I hit enter and it's not quite go and get a cup of coffee, but it's by no means instant.
It's kind of interesting to say that because it's still faster than having to wait for a C compile probably, or sometimes like when you were trying to compile, I think last time I was doing an embedded system, I had to run I can't remember what the operating system, it's a real-time operating system, RTOS, it was RTOS, yeah, a base system and build everything on top, and you've got to get everything to build. You're dealing with the RQ handlers, the entire works, and it's a far cry from having to deal with that when you've got like embedded Linux just to work on top of, and then you're working on it's almost very similar to desktop, right? It's quite nice in that regard.
And actually, we're finding creating an AOT binary is almost as quick as doing .run. And so you might as well.
Right. I suppose there's also that sort of notion that I mean, this is also the hard thing when you're doing embedded, right? That you're having to access real hardware. But I mean, from a perspective, once you have access to real hardware, you're getting that data in and out, you can mock that out and then potentially be developing the rest of the interactions and the everything else on your desktop, and then only having to test it on real device when you're actually trying to test with real sensors or real hardware.
And that was one of the things that MQTT really helped us with for this. So Colin was doing all of the development of the sender and receiver, and we just used MQTT there, so he could send in dummy data from the command line, and like you say, he was able to do all of that on his desktop without any access at all to the Raspberry Pi or the associated sensor device.
Yeah, just spin up an instance of a RabbitMQ Docker container, and away you go.
Exactly, and one of the things I'm doing, I think it'd be quite nice if I can get this driver working completely, to open source that. And one of the things I'd like to do is have a stream of data that we've captured available as part of the test harness, so we can actually run unit tests with a real stream of data. So I'm right now writing the code to capture streams of data from the sensor tomorrow morning when we get it to work.
Oh, best of luck with that. I'm going to see if there's any other questions coming in, and then we'll see how we go. So what else do we have coming in? You have a cross-platform security on Android, iOS, Windows, Mac, Linux, no web. Well, there's probably a reason for that. It's very difficult to get good security on the web infrastructure at the moment, I think.
Well, specifically, there's no mechanism at the moment for secure storage of the private keys in browsers.
I think the browsers have implemented an authorization protocol, which uses like the biometrics of the machine. So the browser can say authorized with biometrics, true or false, but it's not. It's a long way away from like security, like generating a secure key and storing a secure key. So. Yeah,
and so what we're worried about there is with the present state of the browsers, we could build an app platform app and let people on board onto it, and they'd be saving their keys locally, and it's basically just writing the keys in plain text onto the browser cache files on the hard disk. We're talking to people about how we could potentially use FIDO2 devices.
Along with browsers to secure USB tags.
Yeah. But that is going to definitely be a Rome wasn't built in a day type of thing.
I mean, security is hard, and then security, with real devices and everything else, that adds an extra level. So it takes time.
And by the way, this is the same reason why you can't have a web app for Signal.
Right.
And so, I think a lot of stuff that's properly doing end to end is coming from people that understand the risks around key compromise and just can't level that with doing stuff in the browser.
Right.
There's another question here. Is it HIPAA compliant?
So I'll kind of give the usual politician answer to that, as it can be a component of becoming HIPAA compliant.
Yeah.
But HIPAA, like so many regulatory frameworks, is a laundry list of basically checklists that you have to go through in order to say how you're protecting people's data and providing the appropriate controls around accessing it. And so Yeah, I think the at signs and the app platform should be able to help achieve HIPAA compliance for applications built on it, but it is not in itself HIPAA compliant. And you will hear that same sort of politician's answer from the cloud companies as well. So yeah, GCP won't tell you that GCP is HIPAA compliant. They will tell you that using certain GCP services and configuring them in a particular way will help you accomplish HIPAA compliance for the app that you're running on GCP.
Yeah. All right. I think that's the last question that's come in. I can't see any more coming in yet. We'll start going. I mean, unless there's Scott, unless you've got anything else you want to talk about in regards to @sign or security.
Just a little something that's kind of interesting. When you go and get your @sign at the website that's scrolling down there, you will find that you can random an @sign for free. And you don't just get to try this once. Okay, this can become addictive. You choose different categories and you look at it and you see what you come up with, right? Well,
what have you found?
As proof that you can get something interesting, it took me about 20 minutes of looking at different things before I came up with this. Yeah.
So our CEO,
magnificent
Barbara,
Caribbean green.
So that could have potentially been one of Barbara's favorite free @signs of the day. So she quite regularly tweets her favorite free @sign of the day.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
We had one.
It's an interesting one.
Yeah, and there's some great funny combinations pop out of that generator.
Yep. So get yourself a drink, maybe a little popcorn, and enjoy.
Get yourself a free @sign. Get going.
Now there were some questions way back about other things, and I put together a couple of shares real quick to try to address them, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I mean, Gary, Chris, if you want to stick around, that's up to you guys. But we're going to see if we can answer some of these general Flutter questions. Happy to hear your opinions on any point that we mentioned, or if you need to head off, please feel free.
Well, I think we can stay till at least the top of the hour.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Cool. Let's see what else we got. Should we go top down? Scott?
Actually, let's take a look at this one real quick. There were a few people asking about responsive apps. Well, it's in the manual. So if you go ahead over to the Flutter documentation, there you go. So it's right there. And another one that was much more recent. Let me get this ready. Sorry, folks. Trying to do shares in a hurry now.
I can answer another one whilst we're on the way.
Yeah, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
It's the top one on the list. How can I run a Firebase cloud function in the background, say, once I launch the app without waiting for it? I wasn't able to do it in Iceland. How can I run a Firebase cloud function in the background? I mean, I'm assuming from an app, from a mobile app, you mean? Or do you mean, yeah, I guess so. I mean, you just access the HTTP URL. And you can do that from an isolate. But also, it is actually asynchronous anyway, so you can just await the HTTP request. So yeah, I think you need to look at the documentation. You can definitely do that without. You still have to wait. I mean, you don't have to wait for it and pulse your app starter, right? Like it's up to you how you build your app, but it's going to go there in the background without stopping your UI from working. That's not a problem at all. Let's carry on.
All right. Oh,
can I?
Okay.
I'll quickly answer this one and then I'll hand it over. Can I implement block architecture without using Flutter block package and only use provider? Yes, because I do it all the time. Yeah. It's just block is the pattern of the separation of your business logic away from your UI, and then using streams to update your UI. So yeah, totally. Just create a class over here with stream.
This is a point This is a point of confusion, and it's justifiably a point of confusion. I was talking to Chris Sells about this one time. When you hear state management, there are three different things going on. There is the way you manage the state. In other words, the way you change the state of your objects. What people typically think of as state management is more likely something similar to the observer pattern, or using streams, whatever, in order to notify your UI that the state has changed. They're actually kind of different. The business logic is managing the state itself. Your state management is notifying. And because of the way these state management systems work, they tend to each have their own architecture. So when you're thinking, can I implement block? You're thinking about the architecture of the block package, but actually block is a pattern that has nothing to do with the block package. So remember, we have our patterns or our architectures. We have the management of the actual state. And then we have what I like to call state propagation, which basically means it's notification. Think of it as the observer pattern. So everybody says state management and they mean all three, and it confuses everyone.
So often people say state management, they mean architecture or vice versa. It just, yeah, it's general catch-all statement, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, I was asking Chris Sells, why don't we use terms like state notification? And he said, because everyone's already using state management.
Too late.
It's kind of like early on, Wim Leeler was with the developer advocacy team for Flutter. And I didn't understand how the iOS widgets work, the Cupertino widgets. And I asked him, how is it that the Flutter team is doing this and not getting sued by Apple? Right. And instead of explaining about human interface guidelines, Wim's answer was more fun. He just said that legal doesn't let him answer legal questions.
Yeah.
So moving on. Will Dart also cover backend? What you mean, Will? We're there. Been there, doing that.
And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, I think, Chris, you gave a talk about full stack Dart, didn't you?
I did, yes. So Flutter Vikings, full stack Dart talk,
Yeah.
And it featured on some of the Flutter newsletters as well. So people seem to like that. The whole notion is simply if you've learned Dart in order to write your Flutter front end, then why not also write the back end using the same language? And the functions framework, I think, already got name checked earlier in the call. My kind of recommendation to people to try stuff out is go and kick the tires on the functions framework. And you had some stuff from Tony Pujals there.
Creator of the functions framework. Just to mention that.
Well, yeah, and he's got some great examples to show how that can be used with Flutter apps.
And also take a look at how you can create your own server with Dart in a Docker container, because Simon and I were doing that for an app I was playing around with in order to just run everything locally.
Yeah, we were doing this quite some time ago, actually. But yeah, if you grab functions framework, or just simply there's Dart from there's a Docker container called, I think it's Dart Scratch or Scratch Dart or something.
Well, so what's happened with the official Dart Docker container is it's supporting two-stage builds. So the Dart Docker container itself is giving you the SDK and a few other things that you would want to use to build Dart applications. But then if you're creating an AOT binary, you don't want to be carrying around the whole SDK in order to support that binary. And so the second stage of the build is giving you the pieces that you need to add to from scratch. So from scratch is just an empty container. If you're able to statically link like Golang does, then you can create binaries that you can just put straight into from scratch and run them. But Dart is a dynamically linked language, and so you need a minimal sort of layer of libc underneath it. And so what's in that Dart Docker image is a directory called runtime, which is that minimal set of libraries. And so you copy runtime into your empty container, you copy your application in on top of it, and you've got everything you need to run.
A few Linux config files, and away you go.
It is, and it can be tiny. Our secondary server is like 5.5 meg.
Yeah. No, I was releasing. So I was trying to talk to someone about like one of the reasons why we chose to use Dart on the server side for a project. And I was like, I either ship like PHP and or whatever the like Golang, whatever it is, or this whole platform over here. Actually, Golang's pretty nice, but PHP and a bunch of other stuff over here, and it was like a gigabyte like image with Ubuntu as the base or something. It's like, or I just ship the scratch image over here, and it's like a few meg, right? Of Hipaa. You can do the same thing with Golang actually, but it's a bit bigger, but all the same, yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it helps reduce the time it takes to roll out new versions or whatever, because you're just throwing less stuff around.
So just to anyone that wants to go see that talk, you'll find it here on this very channel. You'll find, if you go to the channel homepage, you'll find there's a Flutter Vikings 2022 playlist. And was it day 1 or day 2 you're on, Chris? I don't remember. Do you remember?
It was day 2.
Yeah, day 2.
Day 2 video.
And actually, let me get you a link to the slides if people just want to take a look at those.
Yeah, if it dropped in the private chat, I'll make sure it's shared.
Cool, okay, I've got a quick thing I just want to mention right now. This particular question was asked 3 times so fast I can see all 3 on my screen at once. Please stop spamming. And the other thing is, in an answer to this, there are 2 things. Number one, that's like saying whose dad can beat up whose dad, mine or Simon's. And, my dad can beat up your dad stuff. And also, I think Groove and Chip pretty much said it quite a while ago. But it all depends on what you're trying to do, what you can be productive with, what you can get the job done with, what is going to work best for the app, and which way the wind is blowing on Tuesday.
Let's keep going on. Let's see what the next one is. Yeah. What is the simplest way to make a responsive app? Is there a widget plugin that can help me? No, not really. I mean, there are plugins. There's actually one called Breakpoint, which you'll find by Rody Davis.
Okay, and this is also what we were saying. This is one of the questions I was saying. It's in the manual.
Yeah. I mean, there's guides online. I also mentioned that, go look at Layout Builder and Media Query. The 2 classes that will sort of put you on the way. Oh, one for me. Do you want to read this? What?
John Weiss is having some fun.
Oh, okay.
Never mind. A few weeks ago, why am I reading this? It's addressed to you.
Well, exactly.
A few weeks ago, you talked about API keys and retrieving them from the web instead of storing them in the app's binary. Couldn't this potentially be interceptable?
No. So you can use SSL, and you can do certificate pinning. So you can't have any man-in-the-middle attacks on your SSL. So problem solved. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, someone can go edit your binary, inject their own certificate, or they can do it. But if they've got access at that level, then it's game over anyway. They've got access to the real device and the real stuff, and that's the way it works, right? But from a perspective of man-in-the-middle attacks or someone in transit, it's not going to happen. So yeah, just go with that. How to improve the SEO of Flutter Web? Yeah, that's a completely separate topic, and we're not going to cover it here. And there's just, yeah, it's the same.
Step 1. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's exactly the same as any JavaScript-based client rendering framework, based Angular or React or any of the others. The same problem happens. You need to make sure that you're doing server-side rendering, other such solutions. It's a known problem. There's lots of information out there on the web about SEO. That's what I'm going to leave.
Vue.js has been facing the same problem for a long time. And the number one thing really is, remember, Flutter is meant for web apps, not for web sites.
I mean, the fact of the matter is you shouldn't care about SEO if you're going to do a web app, right? The app is essentially normally like a login private section that's there for managing something or running something, right? The actual website itself, I wouldn't recommend doing that. You can go use Dart. In fact, Dart and Dart HTML directly works wonders. You don't have.
There's also now a Svelte-based framework for doing statically generated sites based on Dart.
Oh, really? Didn't know
that. One of the Dart people tweeting about that the other day. Let me try and dig out the link.
Yeah. That would be awesome.
That'd be great.
I mean, for anyone that doesn't know, quickly, that static site generation is essentially this notion that you do your dynamic processing up front, just like building your app when you compile, and the output of your process of running your Dart code is your website, and that would be CSS, JavaScript, and HTML, which is all that websites are and all they can ever be. It doesn't matter if your website, it doesn't matter if you built your app in your web app or whatever in Flutter Web and it's Dart code, eventually it's running it as JavaScript. So there's that. Right, moving on. Go
on. Actually, I have a little bit, and I think Randall also just made this mention in the chat, but number one, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but you're not new. Sekraz, you're not a new person. So I'm kind of wondering about this. You say you have a JavaScript native library that gets its results in a callback and it's executed using the main UI thread. How can Flutter execute a native call and get the response from such a callback? Now, when I was doing a lot of speaking in person, we had this thing where other speakers would ask questions they knew the answers to, but they did it for the benefit of the rest of the audience, so the rest of the audience could hear the answer. And I'm wondering if this is what you're doing here, because I think you've been around long enough to know about isolates.
I mean, there's also, I mean, you just in the native code, you just create a method channel with a name, and you call a method on it. And then what's going to happen is in the Dart side, you'll have the same method channel listening with it's a set handler, and you just receive the result in there. So method channels is the way that you go in and out of Dart. It can happen either way. So if your action happens starting in Dart, then you're going from Dart using the same method channel to the native side, and then the same response, you can be sending the same response back. But once you start one of these method calls over a method channel, it's asynchronous. So you just store the result object, and then in your result, you can call the result method and send back the response to Dart. There's actually a whole section on the Dart website, on the Flutter website, all about this, actually. Plugins.
It's in the manual?
Yeah, it's in the manual, funny enough.
When Flutter first started, and we all didn't know the widget libraries the way we still don't know now, people would be working on something and creating a custom thing to do something, and maybe we'd go to someone else and say, what do you think about this? I'm trying to get around this. And somebody would look at it and say, don't you know there's a widget for that?
Yeah.
And right now we're hitting the point where, didn't you know there's a manual page for that?
It is actually really, I mean, one of the nice things that I've been hearing a lot about, and it's all thanks to Shams and the team at Google.
Yes. Shams is a person, by the way.
Yeah.
She is the creator of Dash.
And she's been leading the documentation effort on Flutter. In fact, I loved the marketing idea of, what was it, adopt a widget, where someone would, it was a couple of years ago.
What happened to that?
Well, because everyone adopted a widget and it got done and everyone did the documentation. It was wonderful. So basically, the idea was that some of the widgets that needed some documentation and the team couldn't get to yet, you could adopt a widget and go learn about it and write up the documentation. People did, and they submit PRs. And thanks to the effort of the community, we've got some really good documentation, and the Flutter team themselves. So,
and remember, the Flutter team can't do it all.
I do.
And Flutter is open source. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that just the praise that I always hear about, like starting with Dart and Flutter, is how great the documentation is. Like you go to api.flutter.dev, you look up anything, and there it is. There's links to there's Dartpad in there, so you can start fiddling around with it straight away. And then you've got the videos, which are the week videos, and various other things to kind of learn about stuff. And it just this journey. There's always a journey going. It's like a Wikipedia thing, right? Like you can just go through it and learn. which is not, when you jump into some other SDKs, you pick them up and you're like scratching your head, like, what does this mean? What is this concept they've got? Like, you can literally go look at the concepts in the SDK, and there's literally pages of material about how it functions and why it's done the way it is. So, yeah.
But yeah, I remember we were all at Google I/O in 2018 having dinner, and this was a huge topic of conversation. And it was amazing to see what the team learned from that and how they really grabbed the ball and ran with it. Because starting around, what was it, Simon, April or May 2018?
Don't ask me.
When that was I/O. And all of a sudden the documentation went, and it's been great ever since.
John says, currently using Firebase functions for my project. And my question is, do I need to study Node.js, TypeScript, or use a package of Firebase functions interop to deploy? What do you recommend? I recommend neither of those two. So it's something that we were mentioning earlier, and I know we've probably covered this, but I will mention it briefly. Hang on, what's happened? Hang on. Anyway, I will mention actually that, so if you want to use Dart, what you would have had to do to use Firebase Cloud Functions is the Firebase Functions interop, which is out of date. It has, as far as I know, it hasn't been updated for some time, and it's also the interop and the way that the Firebase functions work with stack traces is just weren't meant for Dart, right? You can make it work, but it's not going to be a great development experience, and it's definitely not good for a production environment, right? What you can do instead is use Cloud Run, and you can just start up, as we were just saying earlier, a Docker image. So you get your Dart code, use the standard Docker stuff or the functions framework, and you just literally just spins up a Cloud Run. You can do it with like a couple of lines. There's actually examples. I think there's actually some code course material that you can go through. What are they called? Whatever. But yeah, there's some examples in there that you can go through and deploy your very first Hello World kind of thing. And there's some but that's the best way, I'd say. And then you get your Dart functions running in the cloud, and then they can receive notifications from various GCP events or HTTP transactions, and go from there. All right, let's see what else we have.
I've got one real. Okay.
Go on. No, go on. I'm just going down the list. Go for it.
Sorry, and there are just some things. I know we're kind of going out of order, but what's happening is I'm taking some time to run down links on things. Here's an interesting one, and it's kind of amusing. Why does Flutter not use WebAssembly? Well, see, the thing is, if you look right here on the roadmap for 2022. Okay, and then you
zoom in. You're gonna need to zoom in if you want us to see that.
I know. I'm coming down under Dart. WebAssembly.
Yeah,
coming.
Well, there's WebAssembly coming from both directions. So there's stuff to let you use WebAssembly modules in Dart and Flutter, and there's stuff to let you compile Dart into WebAssembly.
It's really quite awesome, actually, and we've been wanting it for a while, just to kind of eke out that performance, and also mainly the startup performance, right? Like the idea is that you don't have to pass the JavaScript to get your outcome. It's WebAssembly. It's there. You just run it, right? Like there's load time and other things, but hopefully there's also a benefit to what can be optimized out and various other things, but. I'm curious to see what WebAssembly will bring. I know there's few people out there that have done some demos and some various things with Dart. And as it says in the roadmap, they're just waiting for the WebAssembly GC, which is a garbage collector system, to be supported. And then we'll be seeing, hopefully, some WebAssembly stuff this year. So that'd be awesome.
Well, I think it also, if we kind of go back to some of the discussions around native interfaces and whatever that we were having earlier, it kind of gets us around that thing of, oh, hey, I've found a C++ driver. How am I going to use it? Well, one of the routes now will be just compile it into a WebAssembly module and include it.
Well, it's kind of interesting. So there's still, so just to be clear about this, WebAssembly is compiled code. Like there's actually been like if you go to the web archive and go look up DOSBox, or I think it is, or the DOS games, they literally have all the DOS games you can play in your browser, and that's done by literally taking an emulator for DOS-based architecture and then compiling it to JavaScript, EM script, and WebAssembly, and actually having that running in your browser. The difference is that it's not accessing any hardware. It's still running within the confines of the browser. So you can still compile any like C library or anything else, but you're still going to have the restrictions that the browser supplies, which is you're not going to access the hardware directly. Sorry, just to be clear about that, like that point. But yeah, no, it's really interesting what you will be able to do. So things like anything that, for example, let's say you want to do video editing or decoding video or doing some other magical stuff, like that can all be done because it's all happening within the CPU memory bound and can happen inside the browser. But yeah, there's also interesting, like I don't think maybe the Canvas API, whatever it is, the new Canvas API is basically just revealing Skia to the browser code. So you really can get a lot of power from that. The fact that you can use all the Skia based functionality directly in your browser, what Flutter takes advantage of. It's very powerful. Anyway, right.
I got
different.
two. One of them really is, it's a question that's getting asked a lot. The person's correct. But one thing before we go on to that, I just want to mention something completely unrelated. We have a lot of people in the Flutter community who are from Ukraine. And we're all watching the situation. If you know anybody in Ukraine, please check on them. I was just checking on some people a couple hours ago. They are jumping a flight and running to India. And their parents are actually staying behind. And yeah. Anyway, moving on. Let's see here. You're right. We do get this a lot. And up to a couple of years ago, I would have said native first. But now.
Are you heading off? So yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Chris, do you need to head off as well? Sorry, I mean we've
probably good as time as any to drop.
Yeah.
Gary needed to go, and I should probably be on my way as well. So thanks, guys, for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you dropping by and spending time with us, and love always hearing about Atsign and what you're doing. Yeah. So we'll see you again.
Next time.
Bye.
And you know what? We've got this mysterious guy in a black hat.
Oh, there he is. The question.
Yeah. So yeah,
I'm just having a bad hair day, so I'm covering that up for now. And the opposite of that is not having hair. So I'm actually happy that I have hair that can be a bad hair day.
So next question. So is it okay as good fit step for?
Yeah, I mean, in other words, if all you know now is Dart and Flutter, can you get a job? If you know it well, yes. Especially now.
The market is huge. I mean, the Stack Overflow post that I retweeted the other day actually, it just shows how much it's blowing up in terms of popularity. That's just one metric of many. We've known for a long time that from the developer community and from the sort of the private sector and companies and startups are all getting on this sort of bandwagon because they're realizing the speed that they can. That what Flutter and Dart is doing in terms of development speed, and then also on top of that, what it's doing in terms of budget. So,
And if you actually do know it well, I can tell you right away that Huntington Bank is looking for a contractor through recruiters. So is Toyota Financial. If you look on LinkedIn, if you put up on LinkedIn that you're looking for work, you're going to get more fintech companies than you can handle.
I'll mention flutterjobs.info. and flutterjobs.com. Both these websites are made for members of the community, and people and companies are always posting up job opportunities on those sites.
And the Discord channel for hiring is really spinning up. It's really insane.
Am I missing a Discord channel? Where?
Flutter
you mean
Discord,
in the regular
Flutter,
Flutter Discord?
Yeah, on the Flutter Discord.
Okay.
There's an amazing number of job offers these days.
Nice. Yeah, it's really... And the thing is that this is happening before desktop is becoming a big thing. Windows desktop just went to stable. If you think the market for Flutter developers has exploded in the past 6 months, wait until 6 months from now.
Yeah.
I should probably introduce myself.
Nah.
Because you didn't really say much about me at the beginning, but I'm a GDE. I went through the process with Google to say I am the kind of person who wants to be promoting Flutter in the world. So that's kind of why I'm here too, because that's how I am.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for flagging all of the queued questions too.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm watching the chat very carefully. If you put Q in front of it, I almost immediately have this now knee-jerk reaction.
Well, I don't. People can't see this, I don't think, but we have a way inside of Stream, and we're using StreamYard, and we have a way inside of StreamYard of flagging questions.
Yes,
and that's what we're doing. When you put a Q there, it makes it easier to see.
Right.
Moving on.
Let's get through some of these. Right. Is there a way to extend the class and automatically pass arguments to the superclass without having to type them all in, e.g. once it's extended? Okay, so
nobody's working on text theme things like today.
So, what there is no way to extend a class and pass arguments in at the moment. In fact, we brought this up a few streams ago directly with Kevin Moore from the Dart team, and they created a ticket for it. And the idea I couldn't find. If you go to the Dart language repo, it's Dartlang GitHub Dartlang/language, and you will find the ticket in there somewhere. But the premise is, at the moment, the way that you do a constructor, and you can do this dot whatever to reference an inclusive variable for yourself. You'll be able to do super dot and pass over the super, pass it, set your local one, and pass it to the super class at the same time. That's generally the idea, but the idea is it's not there yet, and they're working on it. At the moment, if you want to do this text theme and not copy all the parameters, that's copy with, or inside the framework, it's also called apply or merge.
Yeah.
But basically, they're very similar. They have slightly different mechanisms, but yeah.
And one thing I do want to bring up, I ran into this just yesterday. Simon and I were talking about it. There are parameters that you get when you use apply that you will not have access to otherwise. So be sure to look at it.
Apply and then merge is about merging two objects together and using the set properties from one that are not null in the other one.
The answer to this question I also gave in the chat room, which is that there are things where you're preferring composition over inheritance. That's one way to solve this problem. Mm-hmm. But the other is specifically things like theme are widget scoped, which means that if you add a new theme, you can specify only the changes that you want. So you might have your custom widget just simply provide theme, copy with, and this particular style.
That's actually, they talk about that with merge. Merge is specifically designed in order to be within a smaller scope. So if you've got your whole widget tree, but you just want this one little set of leaves to have a certain text theme, you go to the parent of all those leaves and you do a merge.
Yep.
There's another interesting thing to mention about this, and just general Dart mixins. Mixins are the thing that solves a lot of this as well. Mm-hmm. So the general diamond problem with implementation, but yeah. And
that's just a real quick point on that. That's one of the great things that is also a problem when dealing with Flutter and Dart. There's no one way to fix any problem. There are a lot of different ways. And people are suddenly saying, which one's the best? Which way is the wind blowing?
Except RiverPod is the best state manager.
Okay. Node.js to write cloud functions. Dart can be used.
Yeah, this is it. Can not only be used. Yeah, you can write Dart and only use Dart to do cloud functions. And as I said, at the moment, you would deploy them through Cloud Run, which is just the way that where the service it runs on. Soon we'll be seeing cloud functions being first party support. They're working at the moment. But the functions framework package we mentioned earlier, which I bring up on stream right now, this one package functions framework has some examples of how you do it and deploy it to Cloud Run.
And things have matured to the point, again, to wrap up or to bring together two questions we've already had. Can you get a job knowing only Dart and Flutter? And can Dart be used full stack? Yes and yes.
Yes.
Because now you can get a job doing full stack development knowing only Dart.
Roberto says, after upload to Google Play, I get a report back that there are some issues such as stability and a few more. Is this something to worry about?
Is that 12?
Probably, yeah.
Is that one of those things from 12?
What?
I know there was some weirdness when they
No.
12.
So first of all, you're going to get this. In fact, every app I've uploaded, you're going to get something back. You look at the report and see what it says. If stability is it keeps crashing, then yes, I would worry about it. Are you releasing with Flutter Stable? Are you releasing with Flutter Master? If you're releasing with Flutter Master, then yeah, you're going to get stability problems. It's the master branch.
Well, nobody's done that since 2017.
Right. So, yeah, I would say just look at the report and see what it says. And if you're concerned that's a problem, then it's something to worry about. No one. Most of the time, it's not. Most of the time, it would be like, some other native library or something crashed on this specific device because it doesn't support some hardware or something like that, right? Like you need to go look in specifically what the report says. That's what I'd say about that. Are you afraid of rooted jailbroken devices that could see these keys? Oh, this was from earlier.
That was for that.
So no. So first of all, you can detect if it's rooted and jailbroken and stop your software from working, right? And then second of all, the keys are going to be stored in the hardware key store, which doesn't matter, it's rooted or jailbroken. And also, it's their keys. It's your keys on your device. If you want to run it on a rooted or jailbroken device, they're your keys. You can go get a copy of them. It doesn't matter, right? You are the end of the security chain, right? Like it literally doesn't matter from the security standpoint. The idea of having something. I mean, it's first of all, it's their device. It's your device. Let's say it's your device. You're talking about it's root or jailbroken, and you have access to all your security keys. It's the same thing, right? There's nothing insecure about that. What the person decides to do with the jailbroken device, that's the security problem, right? So if they start installing random bits of software that might compromise the security of their device, well, that's their problem, right?
Can't prevent people from shooting themselves in the foot.
Right.
Yeah. And we are trying to get to all these questions, but we absolutely have a hard stop in 35 minutes. We actually didn't even intend to go that long.
So let's get through it.
So yes, this is a good old one for this question comes up quite a bit, but it's an important one.
With is specifically for mixins, and it allows you to handle multiple mixins as well. They also the mixins run their functions in the order in which you supply them in the with statement, if I remember rightly. And then extends is the same as like Java. You're extending a base class.
And you can only extend one class.
Yes, I think. Yeah, you can extend one class, but you can have multiple mixins on top of that, solving the diamond problem, which is a multiple inheritance problem, which you'll find if you go look up online. And then implements is about implementing the entire interface of another class. So normally that's an abstract class, but it's, again, you can extend an abstract class as well. It becomes essentially, if you extend an abstract class that has no methods implemented, it's the same as implementing that interface. So basically just means that you have to specify every method, right? And every getter or whatever for what you're implementing. Normally implements is not what you want to do unless if you've got a large interface, that's like a lot of functions in your class. But a lot of the time you can do this as, again, solving the diamond problem by having multiple things that you're implementing as well. Yeah. So you can also get away with that way. So if you've got like a callback function or something like that. But a lot of the time it's not used that way anymore. It used to be used that way a lot in the object orientation before we had Lambda. Lambda and closure are the principles of passing functions as parameters or even doing some other crazy things like having a function return a function. That like second order functions, I think they're called. Anyway, but all those principles now are what you use. So, for example, when you specify onPressed a lot in Flutter, and you specify parentheses, equals, pointy bracket, and then some sort of one line of code, that is a Lambda expression. That's what it's called. It's also, if you access a variable from outside of your scope of that function, that's then a closure as well. And essentially, you're doing what most people would originally have done with implements. That is, they would implement the interface of one function, and it's all handled for you, and it's more modern. So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, implements only ensures that your class has every single attribute of another parent class.
Mm.
It doesn't really add any code to your class, so that means you end up having to, if you don't already have this from your extends hierarchy, you have to then add all the functionality of that class.
Something actually I want to mention as well is something that people forget, and that is you can have a class with code and you can still implement it, and you have to implement every method. It just treats it as if there was no methods implemented.
Yeah.
Because every class in Dart is an interface, right? It can behave like an interface. So you don't, that's one of the reasons why, like, coding to an interface, the style of always having abstract classes that provide abstract functionality is not normally the way you do it in Dart, because it's just not necessary. Like, you have your concrete implementation, and then you can do your further strategy pattern, or you can do your further implementations of that, and away you go. You don't really need to have interfaces as such.
Yeah, Dart's structures are like Java structures, but correct.
Right? Let's see.
Oh, yeah, that's always a good question.
How to minimize the size of an application because it contains large megabytes that apps like Calculator. What is happening? How do I overcome it?
It does more than Calculator.
So first of all, I'd say it's actually interesting. It came up in the Stack Overflow post about the size of the app, and that's been a con of Flutter. Not a large issue because of reasons, but it's interesting it was brought up as a downside. Now, interesting, I mentioned this. If you make an Android app and include the support libraries, the compact libraries, Android X, before you know it, you've included a good 12 meg, right? 8 to 12 meg in your app from support libraries and additions to make your app work. So what you do when you're working with the Flutter engine, when you're working with Dart and Flutter, is that it ships the Flutter engine. That is the bit that does the rendering, and that's written in C. That's pre-compiled. That is about 4 meg. Now, the mistake that most people make is that they're building an APK file and it's like 100 meg. And what they're actually seeing there is all of the variations from all the platforms in one APK file. But when someone downloads that APK, it is not 100 meg that they are downloading. They're only downloading the 4 meg for their platform. So to be clear, the size of your application that you're shipping is not, it tells you on the Play Store and the Apple App Store what that size is going to be. What you ship to the App Store is all the different variations of your app. It's called a fat APK in the sense of Android. You can also do a bundle. And bundles, again, a bundle is all the different variations bundled together, and that's what you're shipping. So yeah, the point here is, you don't want to, you don't have to care about it. It's not as large as you probably think. Yeah, and there's also information on the Flutter website all about this. So yeah, it's not huge, It kind of annoys me when I see people like, oh, it's 100 meg, my app's on. It's not nowhere close. So yeah. In fact, a lot of Flutter apps are a lot smaller than Android apps. Right. Go on then, Scott.
Okay, yeah, I've been muted for a while. If you were to hire a Flutter developer, would you ask questions about DS and algo as well? I actually wanted this one. DS definitely. And for those who don't know, when you're looking at going through a coding interview, you can go through the dreaded data systems and algorithms questions. Algorithms,
I was
because, well, most of the stuff done by algorithms is handled either by the framework or by packages. But data systems, knowing what to choose when is still pretty important.
I just reminded me, I was once in an interview and they asked me to write a binary search tree algorithm, a binary tree, and then the binary search to work over the binary tree. And that was very interesting because it's something that I completely failed it, by the way. I failed it. That was a while ago. It was a while ago, right? But I can't remember, I was probably like 17 or 19.
Traversing a BS tree. Traversing a graph is even more fun.
But but the point I was making is I knew it all. This wasn't the issue. The issue was doing it in that kind of format. It didn't work for me.
Yeah. Right.
And it may not work for the people that you're interviewing, right? So the idea of an interview is for you to understand them and to get out of it if they're right for your fit for your company and for your position that you're offering. So it doesn't matter.
Part of what I've learned. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, ask them about algorithms, ask them about data structures, but you're taking it with a pinch of salt. You're not taking what if they say, "Oh, I'm not too sure at the moment." If they literally came back to me and said, "I don't know off the top of my head, but I know it's to do with this," and I'll go look it up on Google or Wikipedia, I'll be like, "Fine."
And that's I think that's the thing, because I was just going to say, a lot of people will actually appreciate the answer. I know in general that a bubble search is terrible and that quick search is okay. And I can tell you the big O, I'm sorry, quick sort. I can tell you the big O of the various ones. But if you need me to actually write it, I need to look at some documentation, because I always do look at documentation. Right there, you've probably done better on that question than anybody else, and you never had to write a single line of code.
I think in terms of practical terms, in terms of practical stuff, you really need to sort of comprehend what the static data structure will be and what transformations can you apply to it. And if you start managing that, you start learning those things, those will apply to any language. I mean, I've done stuff in Lisp that I did in Perl, that I've done in Dart, because it's the same style of here's a data structure and what you can do to it, and here's the transformations you can apply to it.
I want to be sorry to step back. He's asking, if you were to hire someone, would you ask these questions, right? I mean, as a developer, I would definitely learn them. I would say, as a developer, I think everyone should implement Quicksort. Everyone should implement bubble sort. Everyone should try their hand at all of the different algorithms and try the different, understand what this thing, try it out, because that is your learning. You need to know these things, right?
Yes.
But in your day-to-day, you're probably not going to be required to make one of those algorithms because they already exist in all the libraries. But you need to understand the aspects of those, like of why you might choose one over another one. And if you don't know it at the time you're doing it, you're like, oh, was it Quicksort or Bubble Sort that was the better one? You can go read it, right? Like at the time you make the choice, but you need to understand what you're looking for in the first place.
And it's, if you the one thing I would memorize is the big O of each style, so you can sit there and say, okay, this is O of 1, this is O of n. But I don't remember how to write it. And I can tell you that if we were going to do X or Y, then we're going to want to go with an O of N. And you know what? That's what they're looking for. They're looking for whether or not you understand it, not whether or not you can write it off the top of your head.
Also understand what O of something means.
Yeah.
Because if you don't understand the scaling issues involved with certain algorithms, you're going to have trouble. I also feel a little weird when people are quoting Gang of Four patterns as their reason they're doing this. I kind of decide that we should step back from that and go, well, I need to have this be able to access this.
I agree. I agree with you there in principle, right? In terms of we do, but however, the point of those patterns, when you talk about like observer pattern, visitor pattern, whatever it is, it's because it gives you something to both say you're talking about the same thing without having to describe a common language without having to describe the details of what it is.
Yeah.
But details normally, like, you never go with a specific exact way of doing something. You're working it to fit the situation that you're coding in. So,
Yeah.
you know, but the premise is what you're trying to get out of that a lot of times.
Right, exactly.
I know we're getting hung up on this. I've got 2 more points on it though, real quick.
And we'll
for
move on to
one,
the questions.
well, for one, as far as Gang of 4 goes, the patterns really, if you're going to do Flutter, you want to make sure that you understand composite pattern, state pattern, observer pattern are the big 3.
Yeah.
Simon, can you think of any others that you would want for Flutter?
Actually, is it flyweight pattern is another one that's actually used.
Factory.
Factories used everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, to be honest, it just like the problem. I just gonna say, don't go reading the original Gang of 4 book. Right, the original Gang of 4 book, I actually have it. Is written in the language of the 1970s. Right, like they talk about when you call a function, it's called messaging. Right, like the terminology is just not ones we would use now. It's what we'd use in the past. And there you go. Some books like this, the new pattern books.
I'm going to pop a banner up here. I know, and we're going to leave it up for a little while so that you can take a look. That guy is the best on YouTube for design patterns. He's entertaining and he's very clear, and you will learn a ton. And as far as the last point that I wanted to make was when people go into interviews and you get hit with these data systems and algorithms questions, there is a different set of questions that you can get hit with that are going to feel very similar. And that is, do you know your widgets? If you were going to try to do X, is there which widget would you choose? Okay. And a lot of times some of the trickier ones are going to be, would you use list view or would you use slivers? And whether or not you can answer that, that's going to be the big one.
I think the thing
because
is,
that shows you know the framework. I'm sorry, go ahead.
A lot of the questions you're going to get in any of the Flutter interviews are going to be directed to understanding from you about you as the interviewee, trying to understand what you know about Flutter and what you know about the framework. So the more you know, the better you'll be positioned. So learn more. That's I mean, as simple as that, right? Like you'll get questions about state. What state this widget? What stateful widget? You know, the usual, right?
Just watch the entire
basics.
150 program series of Flutter of the Week or
Widget of the Week.
Widget of the Week.
Not kidding.
There's a playlist on the Flutter YouTube channel.
Yes,
and not kidding. Sometimes when I'm driving, and I'm driving 6 hours, 4 hours, 10 hours, I will put the Widget of the Week playlist on my phone, plug the charger in, and be driving down the road for hours, just letting the playlist go. And I'm not sure
if that would send me to sleep or keep me awake.
And there's also packages of the week now. It's like
package of the week. Yeah. Oh, also Flutter in Focus.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, there's some really good stuff actually, and they're the detail ones. There's some in-depth stuff.
Yes,
awesome. Really anyway, let's carry on.
Carry on. Minu,
we got 17 to go, and we got 13 minutes.
Is Flutter a framework or a UI toolkit? A lot of people call it a framework, but actually it is officially a UI toolkit. So
same thing.
Anyway, moving on. Right. What? Where did this question go to? Right. Hang on. Wait. What? Okay.
Main scaffold on an indexed stack and switch pages. Roberto, I think we're going to need code for that.
If you have a main stack and if you have a main scaffold on index stack and switch pages, how do I have a different app bar actions on those pages? Since that, just take the app bar off your main scaffold. You don't have to have one there, and instead, inside your page, add your app bar to the top. Yeah, there's no difference at that point because the top of your scaffold is above.
You just don't want a scaffold in a scaffold. That seems to be a problem.
There used to be a lot more problems around that than there used to be, and now they've got Scaffold Messenger. It solves a lot of that.
You know, and that's I can only think of one legitimate use for scaffolds in scaffolds, and that's what I did. I was teaching a workshop on it, so I had to create a scaffold and then show each different way of doing scaffolds within it. I can't think of another use.
Can I use the list that I get from one provider to be used inside another provider? Yes.
In RiverPod, I don't know if it can do it in provider, but RiverPod can do this easily.
You can do this.
Keep going. I'm going to look up a page that's an example, I believe, of this. I think it's what you're talking about. It is in the RiverPod documentation example.
Oh, yeah.
You can do this. I obviously the reason why you can't use the data inside another provider. If you wanted to rebuild, then you get the context in the create, and you'd be listing and using context.watch inside there. It might throw an exception. I think Remy's really good about capturing when you should and shouldn't be using those methods. But as far as I know, there shouldn't be any problem. It's just a context like any other, and you're doing builds like any other, so it should be fine.
And let me just keep adding. Remy is brilliant. Let's just stop there.
Yeah. If we were starting from scratch and you were trying to get a Flutter developer job, where would you start? Flutterjobs.info, flutterjobs.com.
I would start.
I go to my local...
Does it mean like getting a job, or does it mean like learning from scratch though?
Yeah,
starting from scratch.
You posted the opinionated learning thing, right? Somebody did.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, like at the end of the day, I it's hard for me to. I mean, the content was around when I was starting Flutter, so
yeah.
So I can't direct you to anything specific that I can think of. I mean, obviously the Flutter.dev website does a really good job though with guides, materials, and then directing you to more content. There's links in there. There's plenty of YouTube content, and also the Flutter community medium has great content and links to more content. So, you said there was an opinion. What was that? You said there was an opinionated learning guide, was there?
Yeah, there's a learning guide. Somebody posted that under the.
Oh, if it's been posted, then hopefully that answers your question as well.
Yeah.
I feel I can't anything when it comes to build or create anything by myself, despite hundreds of hours I spent watching, practicing on. Do you have any advice?
Have a goal. Do something.
Yes. So the problem here is just trying to come I mean, we all have this, right? And that is just trying to come up with something off the top of your head is really difficult because you're trying to build it. You're not trying to come up with the idea, right? So go get yourself either go to Dribble. If you're trying to do something UI, go to Dribble, go to one of those places, find some design that someone's done and try and implement it yourself. That's giving you a certain target, something to learn. The other side of this is, you have to have the initial idea, and then you break it up into steps, and then you can tackle each one. But yeah, it's more. Don't get me wrong, it's more difficult by yourself. But then look online, see if you can find a partner or someone else to work with as well.
Well, the biggest thing that helped me is basically being handed basically an app or a set of problems that is much more than just let's play around with this package.
Yeah.
Because then what it is you have to figure out how to solve this problem, and then within this problem, and if you set up, let's say you set up your theme management for light and dark theme, and you decided to keep it simple with a value notifier, but you get deeper in and suddenly now you need RiverPod for other things. Well, do you dismantle all of your theme that you did with value notifier and drop it into your model? Or do you try and do things with a state notifier? I mean, it just, what happens is when you have to refactor and redo things, that's when you start learning a ton. Because then you start comparing things, and it's one thing to put it together. It's another to have to take it apart and do it a different way.
Refactoring is one of the best ways to learn, I think. Honestly, just try the same thing multiple different ways. You'll soon start learning the reasons why you might choose to do something one way or another.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. I've got that link.
Okay.
I dropped it. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, is this which one was this?
This was the RiverPod thing that I've got. So you want to hit that first or this?
Let's get this question out of the way. Using Firebase functions, what do you recommend for the backend side using HTTP trigger schedule? Do I need to study Node.js or use What do you recommend?
Firebase.
So do I need to study Node.js or use package this? I mean, it's what we said earlier. You can just use Dart, HTTP library.
Use Dart.
Yeah.
In fact, the one we brought up earlier, the Firebase functions one, framework functions. Sorry. There's a banner for it. Hang on. This one, functions framework. Sorry. Yeah. Go there. That's your first point of call. Functions framework. Right. Made by Google. Right.
Okay. Knock this one out real quick. Hang on. Oh,
yeah,
okay, you're back to that again. All right. So what we're looking at here, let me make it bigger.
And bigger.
And bigger.
Bigger.
Enhance.
Now this is working with state provider, and what they basically do is he's using two buttons, and as you can see, right here we've got a state provider that is just looking at the object for selected button. But here's the question: is the selected button red? So now it's going to create another provider, and it's going to watch the first provider, and it's going to check to see if the state is red. And if it is, then it will trigger. Now, I don't know if that's exactly what you had in mind, but that is one way of causing another provider to be dependent on a previous provider, almost like a parent type situation.
And this is the reason to move from provider to Riverpod. I tell you, if you're still stuck on
that
provider,
was Riverpod. Well, okay,
yes, you want to move to Riverpod because this kind of stuff is so easy in Riverpod.
Yeah.
I mean, Remy did a great job with the provider. It worked really well based on inherited widgets, but Riverpod is light years ahead of it.
How to use Git for Flutter
Correctly.
Yeah, I mean, you can use Git for text files.
Yeah, I'm not sure I get that question.
It's just using Git to
Daryl, speaking of PHP, does Dart support variables? Yes, it's called dynamic. It's called dynamic.
Stay away from those.
No, I mean
A variable contains B, and you want to look at B.
So yeah, we do have variable types, and it's called dynamic, and you basically just use the word dynamic instead of your type. It does mean that there's type checking involved around that, and it's normally it was obviously slowed down. The reason why PHP is dynamic everywhere, and the reason why PHP is considered slow by some is because of that dynamic type checking it has to do on everything, or at least type inference it has to do, right? And it's the reason why JavaScript also has problems around this, is because, like, comparing a blank array to 0 is true in JavaScript, right? They're completely different objects, disparate types, but it is true because it infers that a blank array has 0 length, therefore 0 is 0, and it's true. So it's normally frowned upon when you want to do strict typing to make sure that you don't have bugs. And they also, sorry, I want to mention that dynamic typing is runtime. Right? Basically means that you will find bugs only when you run that line of code, right? Whereas when you use strict types up front, it's the compiler up front and the analysis server that is going to tell you it can't work like that, right? Because it's not supported. Whereas dynamic is just, when you run it, it will say it's the wrong type and crash, right? Like, or whatever you're trying to do. So yeah, I would.
And languages like PHP and Perl and Python have a very close relationship between the programmer namespace and the value namespace, where Dart doesn't. Dart's value namespace is completely separate from the programmer namespace, and that's why Dart doesn't do that.
Also, there is especially one big article. I don't know where it is at the moment, and we're running out of time, but look up the difference between dynamic and object, because there is an article that is very good. It states very clearly, never use dynamic if you can avoid it, and instead use object. Because object will give you the flexibility you're looking for, but object is a type. Dynamic, under the hood, is not a type, which means you can have all kind of crazy stuff go wrong that object would catch.
You can still have the same type problems with object, like just the idea of just doing.
Yeah.
I'm just
And
saying,
and perhaps object question mark too.
Yeah,
the
nice thing about the nice thing about using object is that if you want to access anything from it, you have to do a type check first. You literally have to say, is this whatever it is, the variable is this type, then do something, right? And
the thing though is dynamic. Can you do an is on a dynamic at all, because a dynamic is not a type?
No, you can, and it'll examine the type from within the dynamic, right? That's not a problem. The point is you don't have to access a dynamic, right? It won't be a compile fault to literally just do dot and then any function. It will just accept it and compile it, and then when it comes to the line to run the function on the variable, it will be like, this function is a int. Sorry, this variable is an int. It doesn't have the function, whatever it is, right? So
app crashes, user uninstalls, you lose revenue.
Whereas if it's
5 minutes to do 12 questions.
Come on, let's get through this.
All right, there we go. Real quick, how to add an app bar if you don't have a scaffold? Don't.
No.
One of the ways. Well, hang on. One of the interesting things that I've done with this is that you can you can fake it. Yeah, I was going to say you fake it using a column.
It's not a
and
fake.
Then the first part.
It's how Scaffold does it.
I understand that. I'm trying to build to a point. There are a lot of things that you can do using that column that way, such as, at least, I don't know, do we have gradients in app bars yet? Did they fix that?
Yeah.
Because they didn't used to, and you used to have to fake it using exactly this.
Anyway, the point is column, and then you put your app bar at the top of your column, and then the next thing in your column should have been expanded to fill the rest of the space, and you put your content in that. Yeah, job done. Right, next one. iOS has Flutter target in Xcode for schemes, but what for Android to set Flutter target?
Talk about flavors?
To set which main file will run. You can just...
no, we just covered that.
No. It's basically saying if you want to use flavors in Android, how do you set the target? You can set the target in Gradle, and it is listed on the Flutter website. It's project.ext.flutter.target. I think it is.
Okay, because this is confusing because he's talking about which main file would run, which is your run configuration.
Yes. So you can just do it on the command line, first of all. But he's saying if you set it in the schema, how do you set it in the same thing on Android? And you can set it in your flavors inside your Gradle file. And there's examples on the Flutter website and other places where you set it in Gradle. Right, moving on.
Yeah. All righty, moving on. How to make font size responsive in Flutter? It already is. Don't mess with it. Oh. But here's the problem though. You have a text scale factor. Don't mess with that unless it is absolutely necessary, because text scale factor will cause the font size to stop being responsive, and especially it will tell it to ignore the user's accessibility. So if the user has accessibility set to be larger, your text will have no problem with that either. But if you use text, what did I just say it was? Text scale factor?
Text 2.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, if you set that, it will ignore the user's accessibility
You've
settings.
overridden it, basically.
Yeah.
If you do want to make font responsive, like what we mean by that is not responsive overall, but if you can use auto text size, I think it's called. It's a package, and it will make if your text is like one word, it will make it fill the area and make it larger and stuff like that. So
and the reverse of that also is fitted box.
Yeah,
essentially it is. It's very similar to fitted box. It provides a similar thing. I think it's auto text size. Auto text. I can't remember.
But technically, the body text size of something like, I think it's 12 points is default. 12 point or 14 point or whatever it is.
14 or 16, I think.
Okay, that is scaled correctly for your device or your web page, and you shouldn't change that number simply because you're on a wider page or a bigger device. That's wrong, because that is supposed to be the readable size for your.
Also, it means like, what's the point of having a larger screen if you can't get more information on it, right?
Yeah, you want more information, not more.
If the
bigger
user,
bigger
if you
words.
want bigger font, they change the accessibility to make it bigger. You should not be handling it for them, right?
Yeah, that's another. In short, The Flutter framework handles a lot of this for you, and if you don't realize it, you start trying to do it manually, and actually you end up making things worse.
All right. Is the fact that Dart is single-threaded considered limitation? It's not single-threaded per se. So what you mean by that is you can start multiple isolates and then multiple threads. And in fact, Flutter uses multiple threads to do its stuff. So your Dart code itself runs in one main, each isolate has one main thread that it runs in. And that is actually a great blessing because it means you don't have to deal with synchronization. And in fact, multiple isolates don't have to deal with synchronization, deal with messaging. So
and
no,
Philip wrote a great article on this. Actually, whether or not Flutter is multiple threaded is beyond your control, but it can be. And the thing is, you spin up another isolate and you have no control over what core that's going to be spun up on. It can be spun up on a completely different thread.
Anyway, we won't go there.
You don't control it.
We got 10 more, and where
okay. How to avoid putting code inside the UI. You separate it with a pattern, or a lot of times if you have logic that has to be done, say to create a list, create a function, and then call the function.
Let me just another quick answer to this is, let me just give you first of all, it's okay to pass a function to a context to a function, just don't store it. Right, it's the context. It's not to be stored. Right, that's the thing I'd mention about that. But also, you talk about how do I separate my code? Literally, is create a class over here with your functions in. Now that is your business logic, right? It's nothing to your UI. It's not. It doesn't inherit stateless or stateful widget. It's just a blank, simple class with your functions in. Then all you do is you instantiate that class at the top of your widget state. And then you can call the functions from it. And what you've just done there, you've made separation of concerns. Your UI deals with the UI and calls the functions from your business logic, and your business logic is over here. Now, that means you can now instantiate a copy of your business logic without the UI, so you can now test it separately from the UI. That's the general principle of the thing.
Never store your context unless you're getx, and this is why you never use getx.
Don't.
Come on, moving on. Next one, come on. If I'm using Firebase Auth, can I use it with Cloud Run, or do I need to implement separate Auth for Cloud Run? You can use Firebase Auth for Cloud Run. In fact, the Google APIs package that's in Dart has one called Identity Toolkit. And Identity Toolkit lets you verify Firebase Auth.
And just a real short one. Okay, for those of you who like getx, we understand that you like getx. Have a wonderful time. But there are a lot of reasons under the hood why experienced people in Flutter and a lot of professionals don't use it.
Yes.
If you're a beginner and it's making your life easier, that's wonderful. But please don't think it means that you understand Flutter, because getx has shortcut so many things that it kind of hides Flutter from you.
Yeah.
All right, moving on.
Sorry for mentioning it, but yeah, well, I had to mention it once here.
So those that want to do management, by the way, on the server side, that is the class that you want. I've posted in chat. It's relying party resource under Identity Toolkit. It has create auth URI, delete account, download account, email link, sign in, public keys, reset password, all that good stuff. It's all done for you, and that's the same stuff for Firebase Auth. So you're good.
So this question, every primitive, everything's an object.
This is well not. I mean, this is curious. Now I only picked up coding like 4 or 5 years ago, so I still remember what it is to be thinking like this.
Okay.
In short, if you are going to do things like, I don't know,
so
manipulate. Okay, let's say manipulate a string. If you're going to reverse a string, okay, the string is kind of a primitive, but you have to call a function on it. To call a function on something, if you're going to call the function of that object, it has to actually be a class. So the string is a class and it has different functions within it. Just about everything is set up that way.
I will mention though that so in some languages, a primitive type means, like an int is just that. It's just the integer. It means it takes up like 32-bit int. It's 4 bytes in memory, and it's just those 4 bytes that are passed around, right? And the same goes for like, if you're dealing with, I don't know, an object reference, it's the pointer. It's normally like 4 bytes. It's so on. Now,
well, and you can't use things like as double, right? Because there's got.
And my point here is that in most modern languages, that you need to garbage collect, you need to be able to duplicate objects. You need something more than just the value, right? Which means you now need a reference to the value. And all it means is you're encasing that one unique value for it in an object. And normally in the case of memory and runtime, that's normally a little header. And in Dart, the header is always 8 bytes, and that's it for an object. So the maximum, you're adding very little to your overall size of passing data around, because you're always passing the pointer, which is the same, more or less the same size. You have pointer compression. And then we also, it takes up very little more than the actual primitive size. What it does give you is a lot more in terms of enhancement, a lot more in terms of language benefits. So, yeah.
Okay. Simon, take that.
What is an alternative for incomplete in Firebase storage? I don't know what they mean, so no idea. Firebase, maybe when you upload take it Firebase storage, you get incomplete or something when it finishes. And what's the alternative? Well, await it. Pass.
Okay. This one I think is going to be really quick. Honestly, Richard, I'm not sure that we can understand that without seeing the code. So this might be a Stack Overflow where you can post the code.
That's probably just because you need to size your content using I would recommend using overflow size box. So I suspect you've got a larger content, and that makes it as large as the whole grid. And even though you're clipping it, the size is still the size of the whole grid. So at a guess, but yeah.
Okay, and I believe this is the last one for the day.
How can I store keys in hardware? Is there a plugin for this? The same JWT tokens. How do I store them securely? You do not need to store them in hardware. You do not need to use any plugin, right? Just writing them to your app's data directory using the path provider package to get the data directory is secure, and is secure enough for any JWT token, right? The difference here is only your app can access that directory, and only by the user using your app. Full stop. It's a secure sandbox. That's how mobile works, right? So there's no need to think about like plugins and secure. In fact, there's a plugin called like Secure Storage Zone, and it's garbage. There's no need to do it, and it only works on certain devices and all the rest of it. Your token will invalidate itself if it expires. It's a temporary thing. It's not secure. It's not meant to be secure in that fashion. It doesn't work that way. So no, you don't need to. In other words.
Okay, I have a question. Serious question. I keep seeing questions about this, but it's not making sense to my brain. Okay, because blockchain is typically about the ledger, correct? Flutter is a UI toolkit. So where's this Venn diagram? I'm not seeing a cross here.
I mean, I think the thing that here is, can you do things with blockchain and with crypto using Flutter and Dart? And the answer is yes, you can. There's plenty of
Flutter and Dart's the UI, and you do whatever you need to do in the backend.
Yeah, but I mean, like when it comes to actually doing stuff with the block, you can do it in Dart. Dart has also got libraries that access using FFI to access some of the higher profile running things. But yeah, no, you can definitely do it, no problem. In fact, there's some libraries already out there for like linking to your wallet and doing stuff with wallets and all the rest of it with crypto. So all in pub.dev. So
okay, and we are now 7 minutes late for a meeting. So here's a preview of next week's question. Be sure you come back and ask that one. But for now, we're going to have to get, because we don't want to get fired.
Fired's a bad thing.
Anyway,
so
thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.